On the edge of a small town called Red Willow, out in the New Mexico territory in the 1880s, there was a ranch that was not big and not small, just big enough to keep a man busy from dawn to dark and still leave him feeling alone. Its owner was Jesse Hale, 42 years old, broad-shouldered, with a back that started to ache when the weather turned cold, and gray eyes that had watched more funerals than weddings. He was not old by Western standards, but he was no longer young in the way a man can swing a gun and sleep under open sky for a week like he did at 20. The only thing that had stayed beside him longer than the people who left, or the ones he buried, was a gray-brown stallion named Copper. Copper was not really copper-colored anymore. The mane and tail were streaked with white, and his gait turned a little unsteady whenever the wind changed. But he had been with Jesse since the years when Jesse first left home, through long cattle drives across Texas and gunfire-filled nights with border raiders. Men in that country changed hats, changed guns, even changed the name of their wife more than once. Jesse only changed saddles. The horse stayed the same. That winter dragged on longer than it should have. The grass was poor. Ice skimmed over the water troughs each morning, and a few of the old cows started dropping. Copper thinned out, the ribs showing more each week. One afternoon, as Jesse was bringing the herd in, he saw Copper stop in the middle of the yard, blowing hard, his left front leg trembling in a way that was impossible to miss. He walked over and ran his hand down the horse's neck. "Getting old, are you, old boy?" Copper snorted softly and pressed his head against Jesse's shoulder. Pure habit. Jesse laid his palm over the joint in that leg and felt the unnatural heat there, the faint shiver in the muscle. He had seen this in other horses, tendons and ligaments beginning to give out, one thread at a time, like an old rope about to part. That night, in the stall, he sat on an old wooden crate and watched the aged horse stand there with his head hanging low. The wind slid through the gaps in the boards and carried the distant sound of the town church bell. The young hired hand, Tom, stuck his head in. "Boss, is Copper limping again?" "Yeah," Jesse answered, eyes never leaving the horse's shadow. Tom hesitated, then spoke, his voice a little smaller. "I heard the vet say, horses like that, you either leave them be and let them suffer through it, or you—" He did not finish. He did not need to. Out west, everyone knew what "or you" meant. One bullet, a shallow grave behind the barn, a rope tied loose. Jesse folded his arms across his chest. "I'll decide tomorrow," he said. "Don't need anyone reminding me." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Boss." "You go on out." Jesse cut him off, not harsh, but final. "Lock the stall. Let him rest. Let me rest." When Tom was gone, Jesse got up and stepped closer to Copper. He rested his forehead against the horse's forehead, breathing in the smell of sweat and dust and dry hay. And something else, something very old, like the scent of the years themselves. "Tomorrow," he whispered, more to himself than to the animal. "Tomorrow I won't let you hurt anymore. That's the best thing I can do for you now." Copper blinked and let out a long breath. He did not understand words, but he understood Jesse's hands. Those hands had hauled him out of a mud hole, had soothed over the torn flesh on his shoulder where barbed wire once bit deep, had jerked the reins at just the right second when the two of them were about to tumble into a rocky creek. He trusted those hands right up to this day. That night, Jesse could not sleep. He lay on his bed with one arm thrown over his eyes, listening to the wind scraping against the roof, listening to the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. He replayed the roads Copper had carried him down, the time he got so drunk in a border saloon that, according to the story later, the horse found the way back to camp on its own. The time bandits chased them along a narrow pass and Copper ran as if there was no tomorrow, until they had burst through the tightest point and the bullets stopped singing past their ears. For a moment, Jesse felt the urge to get up, to say, "To hell with it. Let him live another day, as many as he can." But he had seen old horses left to fade away, dying slow and hard because their owners never found the courage to end the pain. He turned his head and looked at his own shadow thrown against the wall. "If I do it, I have to do it with my own hands," he thought. "You should not hand him off to somebody else. He doesn't deserve to be treated like some strange piece of stock." The next morning was clear and cold. A thin skin of ice lay over the water in the trough. Jesse shrugged into a heavy coat, checked his gun, and knotted a scarf around his neck like any other day he was going out. Only today, he was not going far. He walked to the barn, each step heavier than usual. Tom was already there, fumbling with the stall lock. He glanced at the gun on Jesse's hip, his eyes blinking fast, unsure what to say. "You need a hand?" he asked, though he did not sound sure of himself at all. "No," Jesse said. "You go see to the cattle. This is between me and him." Tom nodded and backed away a few paces, but he did not go far. He stood where the barn wall hit him, hands shoved into his pockets, head bent. There were things a 20-year-old boy did not fully understand yet, but he knew that man was about to lose something that meant more than money. Jesse opened the stall and led Copper out into the back lot, where there was a patch of bare ground looking out over the fields. The sun was still low. Its light made everything sharper, harsher, less forgiving. He stroked Copper's neck one more time, his fingers pausing over an old scar on the shoulder, the place where a bullet years ago had passed clean through and somehow failed to kill him. "It's time," he said softly. He stepped back, hand resting lightly on the grip of his gun. Copper looked at him, not understanding what the gun meant, only seeing that the man he trusted was standing just a little farther away than usual. His ears flicked, his breath puffed white in the cold morning air. At that moment, hoofbeats sounded on the trail behind the house. Then a voice called out, "Mr. Hale, wait!" A woman's voice, a little roughened with age, not young anymore. Jesse turned, his hand still on the gun but not drawing it. A rider was coming in fast, her long coat streaming behind her. As she drew close, he saw she was a stranger, not from Red Willow. She hauled back on the reins, her horse sliding to a stop, dirt spraying from under its hooves. She gave a quick glance at the gun on his hip, at Copper, then looked straight into Jesse's face. "If you're about to do what I think you are," she said, breathing hard from the ride, "then let me have one last ride on him first." Those words hung in the cold morning air, between a man who thought he had already made up his mind and an old horse waiting for something it did not know. Like a new rope stretched suddenly across a road he had believed led to only one final turn. Jesse stood still, his hand resting lightly on the grip of the gun. The old horse, Copper, turned his head toward the stranger, ears pricked forward. He did not understand the words she had just spoken, but he heard her ragged breathing and smelled trail dust on her coat. The woman pulled her shawl down, revealing a sun-browned face, late 30s, with dark brown eyes that had lost the shy confusion of a young girl, and carried instead the steady calm of someone who had been on the road a long time. Her black hair was tied back at the nape of her neck, a few silver strands threaded through it. Jesse spoke first. "Who are you? And why do you think you have any right to ask for anything from my horse?" She tilted her head slightly, as if weighing whether to make it short or long. "My name is Nora Beckett," she said. "I was riding in with Mr. Wilson from outside town, and he told me you were planning to put down an old horse today." When I saw this one from the road, the way he looked at me, it felt like we'd met before. So I thought, if you truly mean to send him off, you might let me ride him once before you do." Tom peeked around the corner of the barn, eyes wide. He had never seen anyone talk to Jesse Hale like that. Jesse frowned. "What do you know about him that makes you think you can ride him?" Nora studied Copper for a long moment. She stepped closer, not so fast as to startle him. Her hand came up, open, waiting. Copper nickered softly, sniffed her palm, then let her hand slide up along his neck, as if some long-buried memory had just stirred. "When I was a girl," Nora began slowly, "I grew up on a horse ranch in Texas. My father once kept a young stallion there, mean and stubborn as they come, with a coat almost exactly this color, except for one small white mark on his right hind leg. He was the first horse I ever learned to ride, and the last horse my father sold when he went broke. I've always wondered where he ended up." She bent down and brushed the hair aside at Copper's hind leg. A narrow white streak showed there, like someone had dragged a thin line of paint and walked away. "You may call him Copper," Nora said, her eyes brightening just a little. "But back then, we called him Rufus, and he was my friend before he was the property of any man." Jesse said nothing. He did not like the feeling of someone riding into his yard and digging up old things he had not invited anyone to touch. But he could not deny the way the old horse was standing now, head turned slightly toward the woman, not at all like a horse facing a stranger. "Even if he is the horse you knew," Jesse said, his voice low, "he's lived his life with me longer than he ever did with you. He's carried me through places most folks only ever hear about in stories." Nora nodded. "I didn't come here to compete with you over who has more memories," she answered. "You're the one who kept him all these years. That already says enough. But if you've decided to shoot him, then one more hour won't add much to his pain. Let me ride him once out on the grass behind your house. I won't ask you for anything else." Tom couldn't hold back a whisper. "Boss, can't hurt anything, can it?" Jesse shot him a quick look, then turned his gaze back to Nora. In her eyes, he did not see the kind of soggy pity that always made him furious, and he did not see the curious gleam of idle people who wanted to watch something tragic for entertainment. He saw an old sorrow, very much like his own, the kind that rose up when he looked at the old horse limping in the stall. "You think one last ride can change anything?" Jesse asked. Nora lifted one shoulder. "Maybe it won't change a thing," she said. "Some things aren't meant to be changed. They're just meant to be said goodbye to properly. I never had the chance to do that with my father, or with the horse that was sold off that year. If this really is him, I don't want to repeat the same kind of silence." The wind moved through, carrying the smell of dry grass and the cold tang of metal from the gun still hanging at Jesse's side. Copper blew out a deep breath and stamped lightly, as if he could not understand why everyone around him was wound so tight. At last, Jesse sighed. "All right," he said. "One loop behind the ranch. No ravines, no wild galloping. If he stumbles and you go down, I'm not carrying you back." Nora smiled, a tired smile, but a true one. "I've fallen off horses a few times in my life," she said. One more time won't be as bad as living the rest of it too scared to get back on." He handed her the lighter saddle and tightened the cinch himself. When Nora put her boot in the stirrup and swung up, Copper lifted his head as if he had suddenly shed a few years. Tom watched them, feeling like he had just witnessed something larger than an old horse taking a morning walk, though he did not yet have the words for it. The gun at Jesse's hip was still heavy, but inside him, something new had joined its weight, something even harder to name. the sense that someone had just pulled his hand back from the trigger for a brief moment, long enough to make him look again at everything he thought he had already decided. Nora swung her other leg over the saddle and settled in, her hands closing gently on the reins. Copper shifted a few steps, as if he were testing out the way of placing his feet that he had known his whole life. Jesse stood a few yards away, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed on every movement of the old horse. Tom stayed behind the barn wall, only daring to stick half his head out to watch. "Circle around the back pasture. Stay away from the dry ravine," Jesse called. "If he tires out, you bring him back right away." Nora nodded. "I have no wish to hurt him more," she said. She touched her heels lightly to Copper's sides. The horse drew in a breath, then started forward at an easy, careful walk toward the field behind the house. The morning was cold, but the sun was already beginning to soften the thin crust of ice on the grass. For the first few steps, Nora let him choose the pace. "You go the way you want," she whispered, her hand brushing his mane. "I'm only borrowing you for a little while." Copper shook his head, tossing his mane as if to shake off the chill. The left leg still caught a bit, but he found a slow, steady rhythm. They moved past the hay barn, across a patch of softer ground, where Jesse had once trained him to run full out. Nora recognized a few familiar landmarks: a lightning-struck tree stump, a pale-faced rock that stood out from the earth around it. "Back then you hopped over this rock like it was nothing," she murmured, "and I hung on for dear life because I thought I'd fall off." From where he stood, Jesse could see Nora's back straight, her hands quiet on the reins. She sat a horse like someone who knew how, not like some curious fool climbing up just to have a story to brag about in the saloon. He saw Copper lift his head a little, ears pricked sharper than they had been in years. Tom whispered, "Boss, look at that. He's moving pretty again." "Moving pretty doesn't mean he isn't hurting," Jesse answered, but his voice was lower now, as if he were talking to himself. At the far end of the field, Nora guided Copper toward the slight rise that overlooked the dry creek bed. She did not ask him to run, only let him stretch his stride a bit. For a short while, it seemed as if Copper forgot that his leg was weak. His gait shifted into something quicker, not quite a full run, but no longer the plodding walk of an old horse. The wind hit Nora's face, lifting a few loose strands of hair across her forehead. "Easy," she said aloud, though her hand eased the reins instead of tightening them. She could feel the rhythm beneath her, a rhythm from long ago that her body still remembered. A loose stone rolled under his hoof. Copper slipped, his whole body giving a sudden jolt. Nora reacted at once, drawing the reins in just enough, shifting her weight back. The horse caught himself, stumbled a few extra steps with a deeper limp, then settled again into a slower pace. I know," she whispered. "I know. You're old now. It's all right. We're only going this far." She turned him toward the house. From a distance, Jesse saw everything: the slip, the recovery, the way Nora sat steady, like she and that horse had come through far worse stumbles together. When they came back into the yard, Copper's breath puffed out in thicker white bursts, his sides heaving, but his eyes were brighter than they had been that morning. Nora stroked his neck, her hand sliding down to that old patch of scarred hide. "Old friend," she said, loud enough for Jesse to hear. "You still remember the road. It's just that the road inside you has changed." Jesse stepped forward and took hold of the reins, steadying Copper. "Did he scare you?" he asked. "No," Nora answered. "I trust he's not stupid enough to go down and kill us both." Tom snorted a laugh, then snapped his mouth shut when Jesse glanced his way. Nora swung down out of the saddle. Her legs wobbled a little when her boots hit the ground. too long since she had last ridden. She laid her hand on Copper's neck one more time, then turned to Jessie. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me borrow back a piece of my life I thought had been sold off for good." Jessie looked at the gun at his hip, then at the old horse, breathing hard but standing tall, his gaze shifting between the two people beside him. "Did this ride change anything in your mind?" he asked. Nora thought for a moment. "It did," she said. "Now I know for certain he is the same horse from back then. And I also know that if you shoot him right now, you'll be shooting a lot more than an old body on 4 legs." Jessie stayed quiet. The wind came through again, this time carrying the smell of coffee from the house, where Tom had just set a kettle on the stove. "Where are you heading after Red Willow?" Jessie asked, as if nudging the talk in a different direction. "I don't know," Nora admitted. "I rode west because there's nothing left for me back east. Maybe I'll find work in a cafe. Maybe I'll teach some children. Maybe I'll just keep going. All I know is, this morning, when Mr. Wilson talked about an old horse being shot, I knew I couldn't just sit and listen." She looked straight at him. "You've lived with him all these years. You know what is right. I don't have the right to say, 'Don't shoot.' I only ask that you don't do it while you are angry at getting old, at the pain, or at being left alone." Jessie tightened his grip on the reins a little. He did not claim, "I'm not angry." He knew he was. Angry at the ache in his back every time it rained. Angry at friends who kept dying or drifting off. Angry that the last living piece of his younger days was now coming apart too. He let out a long breath. "I won't do it today," Jessie said slowly. "Not because you asked, but because I think he needs a little time to understand his life is about to change. And so do I." Tom let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "And after today?" Nora asked. "Tomorrow, the next day, I don't know," Jessie said. "But if I decide to do it, I'll let you know. Or," he paused for a heartbeat, "you could come by for coffee the next few days. See for yourself if this horse still wants to get himself up every morning." Nora smiled, just a small curve of the lips. "If your coffee is not too terrible, I just might," she said. This time, Jessie's smile was real. Faint, but real. The gun was still on his hip, but to him it felt further away from this morning than the distance from the yard to the barn. On a day he had believed offered only one kind of ending, a narrow side path had opened up, just wide enough for an old horse and 2 scarred people to step into and try for something different. Nora did not leave that same day. She told Jessie she needed a few days to look for work in town, and if he did not mind, she would set up a folding cot in the little room off the kitchen. Jessie did not like having strangers in his house, but he liked even less the idea of shooting the horse right after seeing it come alive again in that short morning ride. "Stay a few days," he said, "as long as you are not expecting good pie." Nora gave a small laugh. "I can bake my own," she replied. "You just worry about the coffee." Tom could feel the whole house change. Supper now had the sound of spoons touching plates, and new questions like, "How were the cattle today?" And, "Has the wind shifted yet?" There were small bits of laughter when Jessie clumsily brewed coffee so strong that Nora had to water it down twice. Once, when Tom carried a bucket of water out to the yard, he heard Nora's voice from the kitchen, soft but clear. "If one day you do not need me here anymore, will you tell me ahead of time?" Jessie's reply came low and slow. "I have lost enough things all of a sudden. If you have to go, I will not let it be like the other times I have lost something." Tom did not catch the rest, but that was enough for him to understand that this woman had not only asked for a last ride for the horse. She had asked for one for herself, too. On the third night of Nora's stay, the wind rose hard. Thick black clouds rolled in behind the hills. Lightning flickered far off. Jessie had just finished checking the barn and was warning Tom, "If the wind shifts and starts coming down from the north, that fence line out there will give. If the cattle spook, they will take down whatever is left standing." Around midnight, just as he said, the wind changed. A loud crack sounded somewhere out in the pasture, followed by panicked bawling. Jessie shot up out of bed, grabbed his coat, and reached for the lantern. Tom burst out of his room, not even fully in his boots yet. "The fence, boss!" Nora appeared in the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Do you need an extra pair of hands?" "Stay in the house," Jessie said automatically. "This is field work." But when he and Tom ran out, she was already shrugging into a coat and picking up another lantern. Out in the pasture, it was worse than he expected. A section of fence had gone down, and a knot of young cattle had pushed out toward the dry gully. The wind made the lantern flames jump and sway, throwing wild shadows of cattle across the ground, mixing with other shapes that seemed to be running in the dark. Tom shouted, trying to drive the herd back, but the louder he yelled, the more they pressed toward the open gap. The young horse under him was spooked too, jerking at the bit. Jessie swore under his breath. His own horse was starting to sidestep and dance, nervous at the thunder grumbling overhead. He knew it would only take one calf slipping into that ditch for the rest to follow like a flash flood. At that moment, Nora turned toward the barn. Copper stood inside, head stretched out over the door, his body trembling slightly. He could hear the cattle, hear the wind, hear Jessie's voice yelling out in the dark. Nora slid the latch and opened the stall. Her hand went to his neck. "Old friend," she said quickly, "you have led a herd through worse than this. Can you do it one more time?" She led Copper out with no real saddle, no proper bridle, just a makeshift rope looped over his head. Jessie spun around, eyes wide. "What in hell do you think you are doing?" "The herd does not need more shouting," Nora answered, breathing hard. "They need a familiar shape out in front. Which horse has been leading them out to graze all these years? Which one goes first?" Jessie paused for a heartbeat. He knew the answer, even though he did not want to say it. "It is still Copper," he said quietly. Nora swung up bareback. "If you are worried about me, yell at something else," she told him. "But you know better than anyone they will follow him before they follow us tonight." Jessie looked at Copper's front leg, where the limp was impossible to hide. In that moment, he had to choose: keep the old horse safe in the stall so he would not tire himself, or let him do the thing he had been born to do. One last time. "Go on the right side of the herd," he said quickly, "and do not let them press toward the gully. Copper knows the way back to the corral. You just stay balanced." Nora nodded and nudged the horse. Copper drew a deep breath, as if gathering every remaining bit of strength, then stepped out into the screaming wind. Jessie and Tom spread out to either side, calling low instead of hollering. Copper passed in front of the cattle, his pace not fast, but firm. Each time he turned his head, the herd swung with him. The sound of his hooves struck the ground with the same steady rhythm they had heard on countless evenings being driven home. A young calf nearly skidded toward the edge of the dry wash. Copper cut across at once, putting himself between it and the drop, his shoulder slamming into the calf's side and pushing it back into the herd. Nora clung tight, her lips pressed together, but she did not jerk the rope. She let Copper choose the line. Slowly, the whole herd turned, then rolled back toward the section of fence that was still standing. Steam rose from wet hides and horsehair and the faces of the men. The wind kept howling, but the panicked bawls began to fade. When the last animal crossed into the safer pen, Jesse signaled Tom to lash the broken gap with rope and temporary posts. Copper stopped, head lowered, sides heaving, every breath loud in the cold air. Nora slid off his back, her legs shaking. She stroked his neck, her palms slick with horse sweat. "It is done," she whispered. "You did real good." Jesse came up and laid his hand on the old horse's shoulder. His palm was heavy, but steady. "If he had not been here tonight," Tom shook his head, "I do not even want to think about what would have happened." Jesse looked from Copper to Nora, then out at the cattle settling down again. In his mind, the picture of his gun pointed at the horse's forehead that morning suddenly felt strange, like a scene from some other man's life. "Tomorrow," he said slowly, "we will put that fence back up the right way. As for the other thing..." He stopped for a moment, then rested his forehead against Copper's, just as he had the night before. "It is not tomorrow anymore, old boy," Jesse said softly. "I am not going to shoot you. Not after tonight." Nora stood a few steps away and heard every word. She did not step in, only drew her scarf closer around her neck to hide the smile blooming at the corner of her mouth and the sudden heat of tears in her eyes. Up above, the dark clouds began to break apart. After the wild wind, the cold air seemed clearer. That night, for the first time in many years, Jesse lay down without hearing a gunshot in his mind for any reason at all. He listened to the breathing of the old horse in the barn, to the wind easing off, and somewhere nearby, the quiet tread of a woman's footsteps passing through the kitchen, pausing at the window that looked out over the back field. The next morning, Copper was still standing in his stall, tired, thin, left leg still limping, but he lifted his head when Jesse stepped in, as if he were waiting for him to say something. Jesse leaned against a post, coffee cup in hand. "No, old boy," he said quietly. "After last night, I just cannot bring myself to shoot you." Tom heard that and let out a long, obvious sigh of relief. "So what do we do with him now, boss? He cannot go long distance anymore." "If he cannot go far, then he goes close," Jesse answered. "If he cannot lead the herd, he can pull a light cart, teach the kids. Old folks, old horses, still deserve a place to stand." A few weeks later, that is exactly how it was. On slow afternoons, the children of Red Willow would come running to the fence at the Hale place, their eyes fixed on the old gray-brown horse. Copper would pull a little wooden cart around the yard, moving slow but steady. Nora sat on the back, holding the lines, and the children took turns climbing aboard, every one of them laughing. Jesse leaned in the doorway and called out, "Hey kid, sit up straight. If you get scared, just say, 'Stop.'" Copper knows that word better than he knows crying. A little girl asked, "What if he runs fast, mister?" "If he runs fast on that leg," Jesse chuckled, "then I will buy him a cup of coffee." At night, the house did not feel so empty. Out on the porch, Nora sat with her cup of tea, Jesse with his coffee. Light from the kitchen spilled warm and yellow across the yard. Copper grazed near the barn, lifting his head now and then when the wind shifted. Nora asked, "Do you still think about selling the ranch and just leaving?" Jesse looked out over the grass, then turned back to her. "I used to," he said. "Now, not as much. I'm starting to think, if someone is willing to stay here with me, maybe I do not need to go looking for some bigger place somewhere else." She was quiet for a moment. "You know," Nora said softly, "the day you were going to raise that gun at Copper might have been the day he saved you from a whole different life. A life with no front porch, no children laughing, and no one sitting beside you tonight." Jesse looked at the old horse, then at Nora's hand resting on her knee. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe so. He saved me one more time without even knowing it." Out in the yard, Copper lifted his left leg and set it down again, slow and careful. He would never run like he used to, but he stood there, calm and solid. Proof that there are some things we do not throw away just because they are not fast anymore. Out west, folks like to tell stories about gunshots that end everything. But sometimes, what changes a man's whole life is the moment he lowers the gun instead, gives an old horse and himself one more chance to stay. Jesse thought he was making room by putting Copper down. Turns out, by keeping him, he opened up space for laughter, for a woman who knocked on the door at just the right time, and for a new life that moved slower, but felt a whole lot warmer. If this story touched you even a little, if you also have an old horse in your life, a person, a memory, or a place you just cannot bring yourself to give up, I would love to invite you to subscribe to the channel, so each evening you can come back and listen to more love stories and life stories from the old American West. Click like if you think Copper deserved many more quiet afternoons, and leave a comment to tell me what your old horse is. And if you do not want to miss the next stories, turn on the notification bell so that when the sun goes down and the voice of the storyteller begins, you will always have a spot waiting for you here on this porch.